Don't let her inside. Vanessa's voice cracked through the marble foyer like a whip. I mean it, Marcus. That child does not belong in this house. Marcus Calloway stood frozen at his own front door, keys still in his hand, staring at the small girl standing on his porch in the rain. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her sneakers were soaked through. Her coat was 2 sizes too big, the sleeves rolled up in thick cuffs that had clearly been done by someone who loved her but couldn't afford better. She was standing outside the gate, Marcus said slowly, by herself, in this weather. So call the police. Call social services. Call anyone. Vanessa's diamond ring caught the hallway light as she crossed her arms. You do not bring strange children into a $40 million house, Marcus. This is not who we are. The girl hadn't said a word. She just looked up at him with enormous brown eyes, water dripping off dark curls plastered to her forehead. Then, slowly, she lifted her small wrist. A bracelet, thin, silver, a little tarnished. A single charm hung from it. A tiny bird with one wing bent, like it had been dropped 100 times and never quite fixed. Marcus felt something cold move through his chest. He hadn't seen that bracelet in 11 years. Where, he said, his voice suddenly unsteady, did you get that? The girl blinked at him, rain sliding down her cheeks like she'd been crying for a long time before she ever knocked. My mom said if I was ever lost, she whispered, to find the man with the crooked smile. She said he'd know the bird. Vanessa let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Marcus, this is absurd. She's clearly been coached. Some scam artist sent a child to your door hoping you'd feel guilty and open your wallet. It happens to men like you constantly. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was crouched down at eye level with the girl, staring at that little silver bird like it might vanish if he blinked. He had given a bracelet exactly like this one to exactly one person in his entire life, and she had disappeared from it 11 years ago, on the worst night of his life, without a single word, without a goodbye, without an explanation, leaving nothing behind but a note that said, "I'm sorry, this is safer for both of us," and a hole in his chest that no amount of money had ever filled. "What's your name?" he asked the girl, and his hands were trembling now, which was something Marcus Calloway's hands never did. Not in boardrooms, not in hostile takeovers, not when journalists shoved microphones in his face and asked why the city's most eligible billionaire had never once been photographed with a woman he actually loved. "Lily," she said, "Lily Reyes." "Reyes?" Marcus's stomach dropped through the floor. "Where is your mother, Lily? Where is she right now?" The girl's chin began to tremble. Her small hand closed tightly around the bird charm, like she was holding on to the last solid thing in the world. "She's sick," Lily whispered. "Really sick. She told me if anything happened, I had to find you. She said you were the only one who could keep me safe." Behind them, Vanessa's face had gone very still, very pale, in a way that had nothing to do with concern for a shivering child on the doorstep. "Marcus," she said, quieter now, all the earlier fury replaced by something sharper, something careful. "Can I speak to you inside, alone?" But Marcus didn't move. He kept staring at the bracelet, at the bent silver wing, at the eyes that were unmistakably, impossibly, achingly familiar, because he had seen those exact eyes before, every night for 11 years, in the dreams he never told anyone about. The rain kept falling. The girl kept shivering. And somewhere across the city, in a hospital room no one in that house yet knew existed, a woman named Elena Reyes was running out of time to tell the truth she had buried for 7 years. A truth that was about to walk straight through Marcus Calloway's front door and tear his entire world apart. "Inside," Vanessa hissed again, but Marcus finally stood, scooping Lily up in his arms without a second thought, ignoring the way Vanessa's mouth fell open in disbelief. The girl was freezing, her small body shaking against his chest, and something ancient and protective roared awake inside him, something he hadn't felt in 11 years. "Get her a towel. Get her dry clothes. Now." His voice left no room for argument, not even from Vanessa, who stood rooted in place, watching him carry a stranger's child through her pristine white hallway, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. In the kitchen, wrapped in a cashmere throw that cost more than most people's rent, Lily sipped hot chocolate with both hands while Marcus knelt in front of her, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Lily, I need you to tell me everything. Where's your mom right now? What hospital?" "Riverside," she whispered. "The doctors said her heart is broken." Marcus's own heart nearly stopped. Not a metaphor, he realized, watching the girl's face. She meant it literally, some kind of cardiac condition, but there was something else in the way she said it, something that made the words feel heavier than a diagnosis. "Lily," he softened his tone. "How long have you known my name?" "Mom talks about you all the time," Lily said. "She keeps a picture. You're younger in it, you're laughing." She tilted her head, studying him with the unnerving directness only children have. "You don't laugh like that anymore." Marcus felt like the floor had tilted beneath him. Across the kitchen, Vanessa had gone very quiet, her arms crossed so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "This is insane," she finally said. "You don't even know if this woman is telling the truth. People fabricate stories like this constantly when they find out who you are." "Her name is Elena Reyes," Marcus said flatly. "I know exactly who she is." The silence that followed was so complete that Lily's spoon clinking against her mug sounded like a gunshot. Vanessa's face changed. Just slightly. Just enough. "You know her," she repeated, and it wasn't a question. There was something underneath her words now, not confusion, but fear. Marcus turned to look at her fully for the first time since Lily had appeared on the porch. 11 years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Elena. She left 3 days before our wedding. No warning, no explanation, just a note." His jaw tightened. "I never knew why. I searched for over a year before I gave up." Lily's small voice cut through the tension. "Mom said she had to leave. She said someone made her." The room went ice cold. "Made her?" Marcus repeated slowly, kneeling back in front of the girl. "Lily, do you know who?" The girl hesitated, glancing nervously toward Vanessa, who had gone unnaturally still, her expression a mask stretched too tight over something underneath. "She said a woman came to see her," Lily whispered. "Before the wedding, she said if Mom didn't leave, something bad would happen to you." Marcus's eyes slowly rose to meet Vanessa's. "What woman, Lily?" His voice had dropped to something dangerous and quiet. "Do you know her name?" Lily reached into the pocket of her oversized coat and pulled out something small, crumpled and yellowed with age. A photograph, folded so many times the creases had worn white lines through it. She handed it to Marcus with the careful solemnity of a child, entrusting him with the most important thing she owned. Marcus unfolded it with trembling hands. 2 women stood in the picture. One was Elena, younger, laughing, achingly familiar. The other was turned slightly away from the camera, her face partially obscured, but the diamond bracelet on her wrist was unmistakable. He'd bought it himself, years ago, from a jeweler on 5th Avenue. He looked up slowly at Vanessa. "Where did you get this bracelet?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, though he already knew the answer, sitting in Lily's photograph, glittering on a stranger's wrist 11 years ago. Vanessa's carefully composed face finally cracked. "Marcus," she said, and for the first time in 6 years together, her voice shook. "I can explain everything, but you need to sit down first." Behind them, unnoticed by either adult, Lily quietly slipped the little silver bird bracelet off her wrist and set it gently on the kitchen table, beside the photograph, as if some small part of her already understood that nothing in this house would ever be the same again. "Explain," Marcus said. The word came out low, controlled, the same tone he used in boardrooms right before he dismantled someone's entire argument. "Start with why you have a photograph of you and Elena that Lily just handed me." Vanessa's hands twisted together in front of her. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." She sank into a kitchen chair, and for a moment, the Ice Queen composure that had defined her for 6 years slipped completely, revealing something raw underneath. "Elena worked for my family," she said quietly. "Before you ever met her, she was my mother's personal assistant. That's how I knew her first." Marcus stared at her. "You never mentioned that. Not once. In 6 years. Because I didn't want you to make the connection." Vanessa's voice cracked. "When you told me you'd been engaged before, when you told me her name, I nearly walked out of the restaurant. Do you understand what it felt like, sitting across from the man I was falling for, realizing he'd once loved someone I'd spent years being jealous of?" "Jealous of her?" Marcus's brow furrowed. "Why would you—" "Because my mother adored her," Vanessa snapped, years of buried resentment breaking the surface. "Elena Reyes, the brilliant assistant, the girl from nothing who charmed everyone she met. My mother used to say she wished Elena were her daughter. Do you know what that does to a person?" Lily had gone very still in her chair, watching the adults with the wide, careful eyes of a child who had learned to read a room before she could read words. "So you went to her," Marcus said, the pieces assembling themselves into a shape he didn't want to see. "3 days before our wedding, you went to Elena and told her something that made her disappear." Vanessa didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. "What did you say to her?" His voice had dropped to something Vanessa had never heard before. Not in 6 years, not once. "Vanessa, what did you tell her?" "I told her the truth," Vanessa finally whispered. "That you'd never be happy in a life that small. That she'd hold you back from everything you were building. That in 5 years you'd resent her for it, and she'd spend her whole life watching you regret marrying her." "That wasn't your truth to tell." "I told her I'd make sure she regretted staying," Vanessa said, and now tears were sliding down her face, but her voice stayed strangely flat, like she was reciting a confession she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in her head and never once expected to say aloud. "I threatened her job, her mother's medical bills. I knew about those too. I told her if she didn't leave quietly, I'd make sure she lost everything she had left." The kitchen had gone utterly silent, except for the rain still ticking against the windows. "She left to protect her mother," Marcus said slowly, and something in his chest felt like it was splitting open along an old scar. "She left because you threatened the only family she had." "I didn't know," Vanessa said, her voice breaking now. "I didn't know she was—" She stopped herself. "Didn't know what?" Marcus's eyes narrowed. Vanessa looked at Lily, really looked at her, for the first time since the child had appeared in the doorway, and something shifted across her face. Recognition, and beneath it, horror. "I didn't know she was pregnant," Vanessa whispered. The room tilted. Marcus turned slowly toward Lily, whose small hands had curled into fists in her lap, whose brown eyes, his eyes, he realized now, the shape of them, the exact color, were filling with tears she was clearly trying very hard not to let fall. "Lily," he said, his voice barely holding together, "how old are you?" "I turn 8 in March," she whispered. Marcus did the math without wanting to. 11 years since Elena vanished. 8 years since Lily was born. The timeline collapsed in on him like a building losing its foundation. "Lily," he said again, kneeling in front of her, his hands shaking as he reached for hers, "do you know who your father is?" The little girl looked up at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she smiled, small and sad and achingly hopeful. Mom said I'd know him, she said, because he'd have the same crooked smile as me. Marcus Calloway, a man who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking, who had stared down hostile boards and furious shareholders without a single tremor in his voice, felt his entire world come apart at a kitchen table, in front of a woman who had lied to him for 6 years over a child he hadn't known existed. And somewhere across the city, in a hospital bed at Riverside, Elena Reyes was fighting to stay alive long enough to tell him the rest of the truth, because the bracelet and the threat, and even the pregnancy were not the worst secret she had buried 11 years ago. Not even close. Marcus didn't remember grabbing his car keys. He didn't remember the drive, or running 3 red lights, or leaving Vanessa standing frozen in the kitchen with Lily's small hand wrapped tightly around his own. All he remembered was the fluorescent hum of the Riverside Hospital hallway and a nurse's clipboard and the words, "Family Only," being waved aside the moment he said the name Calloway loud enough for the front desk to recognize it. Room 412. Elena Reyes. He stopped outside the door, his chest heaving, Lily's small hand still gripping his fingers like she was afraid he'd disappear the way her mother once had. "She's sleeping most of the time now," the nurse said gently, her eyes soft with the particular sympathy reserved for families who didn't yet understand how bad things were. "The doctors can explain the prognosis, but I have to warn you, her heart condition is advanced, peripartum cardiomyopathy, untreated for years. It's a miracle she's lasted this long." "Untreated," Marcus repeated. "Why untreated?" The nurse hesitated, glancing at Lily before choosing her words carefully. She didn't have insurance for a long time. She kept saying she couldn't afford to be sick, not with a daughter to raise alone. Marcus felt something inside him crack clean in half. 11 years. Elena had spent 11 years raising his daughter alone, working herself into heart failure, while he'd spent those same 11 years accumulating more money than one person could spend in 10 lifetimes, money that could have saved her, if only he'd known. He pushed open the door. Elena Reyes lay small and pale against the white hospital sheets, tubes trailing from her arm, a heart monitor tracing unsteady lines above her bed. She looked so different from his memory, thinner, older, the years and the illness carved into her face. And yet the moment her eyes fluttered open and found his, Marcus was thrown backward 11 years in an instant. "Marcus," she breathed, and her voice cracked on his name like she couldn't believe it was real. "You should have told me," he said, and his voice broke too, all his boardroom composure gone. "Elena, you should have come to me. I would have. I couldn't." Her hand trembled as she reached for Lily, who climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed, curling against her mother with the practiced gentleness of a child used to being careful with something fragile. Vanessa made it very clear what would happen if I did. "I know," Marcus said. "She told me everything. Elena, I am so sorry. I had no idea." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head slowly. "There's something else, Marcus. Something Vanessa doesn't even know." Marcus went still. "What do you mean?" Elena's fingers tightened weakly around Lily's small hand. "Vanessa threatened me because of the wedding, because of jealousy and old resentment, and things that had nothing to do with you." She swallowed hard, her breath rattling faintly. "But that's not the only reason I ran." "Then what is?" Elena's eyes drifted, briefly, achingly, to the door, as if checking that no one else could hear. "The night before Vanessa came to me," she whispered, "I found something. In your office. A file I wasn't supposed to see." Marcus frowned. "What kind of file?" "About your father's death," Elena said, and the monitor beside her bed gave a soft, uneven beep. "Marcus, they told you it was a heart attack, an accident." Her grip on Lily's hand tightened. It wasn't. The room seemed to drop several degrees. "What are you talking about?" Marcus's voice had gone hoarse. I saw documents, Elena whispered, tears sliding freely down her face now, financial records, insurance payouts, timelines that didn't add up. Someone close to your family benefited enormously from your father's death. I was scared, Marcus. I was 24 years old and pregnant and terrified, and I didn't know who to trust. So I ran, and I told myself I'd protect our daughter by disappearing completely. Who benefited? Marcus demanded, his pulse roaring in his ears. Elena, whose name was on those documents. Elena's eyes fluttered, her strength visibly fading, the heart monitor's rhythm growing thinner. The same family, she whispered, that raised the woman you've spent the last 6 years engaged to. The monitor beside her bed let out a sharp, urgent beep. Elena! Marcus! She gasped, her hand slipping from Lily's, her eyes rolling back as the machine's alarm shattered the quiet room. The notebook. It's hidden. Lily knows where. Nurses flooded through the door, shouting for him to step back, wheeling in a crash cart, as Lily screamed her mother's name, and Marcus stood frozen in the chaos, staring at the woman he had never stopped loving as her heart, quite literally, gave out in front of him, leaving him with a daughter he'd just met, a fiancée who had betrayed him in ways he was only beginning to understand, and a secret about his father's death that reached far deeper and far darker than he could have ever imagined. The crash cart doctors worked for what felt like an eternity but was, according to the clock on the wall, only 90 seconds. Marcus stood pressed against the far wall, with Lily buried against his side, her small body shaking with sobs, both of them watching as the frantic rhythm on the monitor, slowly, impossibly, steadied. "We have a pulse," one of the doctors called out. "She's stable, barely, but she's stable." Marcus's knees nearly gave out with relief. It took 2 more days before Elena was strong enough to speak again, 2 days during which Marcus barely left the hospital, during which Lily fell asleep curled in a chair beside her mother's bed, while Marcus made phone calls no father should ever have to make, arranging cardiac specialists, arranging bills to simply vanish, arranging a future for a daughter he'd known for less than a week. He didn't go home. He didn't speak to Vanessa. She texted 17 times. He didn't answer once. On the 3rd day, when Elena's color had finally returned and the doctors allowed longer visits, Marcus sat beside her bed with a leather folder in his lap. The notebook Lily had led him to, hidden for 11 years in the lining of an old suitcase in the small apartment Elena and Lily called home. Its pages held everything: bank transfers, forged signatures, a private investigator's report Elena had kept copies of at great personal risk, all pointing toward the same conclusion Marcus had spent 3 sleepless nights confirming through his own lawyers. His father hadn't died of a heart attack. He'd been poisoned, slowly, over months, by someone with access to his private study and his evening tea, someone who had married into money through Marcus's father's approval and stood to lose everything the moment Marcus's father discovered the truth about where the company's missing funds had gone. Vanessa's mother. Vanessa herself had been 20 years old when it happened, likely uninvolved, likely as blindsided as Marcus once she learned the truth, but she had spent years since fiercely protecting her mother's secret, first out of loyalty, and later, Marcus suspected, out of fear of what exposure would cost her socially and financially. It didn't excuse what she'd done to Elena. Nothing would. The story broke 3 weeks later, not through tabloids but through a quiet, devastating internal investigation that Marcus funded personally, ensuring the truth reached his father's old board members, the family's lawyers, and eventually the district attorney's office. Vanessa's mother was arrested. Vanessa herself, stripped of the engagement and the life she'd built on Marcus's name, disappeared from the city's social pages entirely, though Marcus, true to the man his father raised him to be, made sure she wasn't left destitute. Justice, he decided, didn't require cruelty. Elena recovered slowly. A new medication regimen, a surgery Marcus's money made possible within days instead of the years-long wait list she'd have faced alone, and, most importantly, the simple relief of no longer carrying 11 years of secrets by herself. It was Lily's 8th birthday, 6 months later, when Marcus finally slid the little silver bracelet, repaired now, the bent wing gently straightened by a jeweler on Fifth Avenue, back onto her wrist. "The bird flies straight now," he told her, kneeling in the backyard of the house that finally, truly, felt like a home, "just like you found your way to me." Lily threw her arms around his neck, and over her shoulder, Marcus caught Elena's eyes, tired, still healing, but brighter than he'd seen them in 11 years. "Thank you," Elena mouthed silently. Marcus shook his head, pulling his daughter closer, no longer a man who measured his worth in mergers and acquisitions, but simply a father, finally, impossibly, home.